The Mongol army stretched endlessly across the morning plain, their banners fluttering in the gentle breeze. Young Commander Altan led the charge, his heart filled with dreams of glory. This was to be their greatest victory, the campaign that would cement their dominance across the steppes. The enemy lay ahead, unprepared and weak, or so they believed. Altan's eyes narrowed as he studied the enemy formation through the morning mist. Everything seemed perfect, the plan flawless, his warriors ready. Yet something deep within him stirred uneasily. A whisper of doubt crept into his mind, but he pushed it away. Victory was so close he could almost taste it. The enemy appeared weak and disorganized, perfect prey for the Mongol war machine. The enemy had chosen their ground well, Altan realized too late. They sat behind natural fortifications, their archers positioned on the high ground. But his confidence remained unshaken. Numbers would win the day, he told himself. His army outnumbered them 3-1. What did defensive positions matter against such overwhelming force? The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of mist. With a mighty roar, Altan raised his sword high. The signal was given, and 10,000 warriors echoed his battle cry. Steel flashed in the morning light as weapons were raised skyward. The earth trembled beneath countless hooves as the charge began. Victory seemed inevitable, written in the thunder of their approach. Nothing could stop them now, nothing at all. The charge thundered across the plain like a force of nature itself. Dust clouds rose behind them as 10,000 hooves struck the earth in perfect rhythm. Altan rode at the forefront, his warhorses mane streaming behind like battle flags. The enemy grew larger with each passing moment, but still they seemed small and insignificant. This was their moment of destiny, their path to absolute victory. Altan's warhorse surged forward with magnificent power, its hooves barely touching the ground. The animal seemed to sense victory in the air, its eyes bright with battle fever. Years of training had prepared it for this moment, just as years of warfare had prepared its rider. Together they were unstoppable, a perfect union of man and beast charging toward destiny. The enemy line loomed ahead, growing ever closer. From above, the Mongol army appeared like a living river of steel and leather flowing across the landscape. 10,000 warriors moved as one, their formations perfect, their purpose clear. The enemy line ahead seemed fragile by comparison, a thin barrier against an unstoppable tide. Altan's heart swelled with pride and anticipation. This would be remembered for generations, this perfect charge, this inevitable victory. Mongol archers rode alongside the charge, their composite bows singing with deadly accuracy. Arrow after arrow found its mark among the enemy ranks, softening their defenses before impact. The archers moved with practiced ease, years of training evident in every motion. They were the finest horse archers the world had ever seen, their skills legendary across every conquered land. Victory was assured, absolute, inevitable. But the enemy archers were not idle. From their elevated positions, they loosed clouds of arrows into the advancing Mongol ranks. Steel-tipped death fell from the sky like rain, finding gaps in armor and flesh alike. The Mongol warriors whooped and cheered, believing the enemy's arrows were merely delaying their inevitable victory. They rode on, undeterred, their numbers still overwhelming, their confidence unshaken. The first casualties fell without warning, arrows finding their marks with cruel precision. Mongol warriors cried out in pain and surprise, their blood staining the morning grass. But still they charged, wounded men gripping their reins tighter, refusing to yield. Death was acceptable, part of war's price. Victory would justify every loss, every drop of spilled blood. They rode on, undaunted by the growing toll. Altan saw his warriors fall and felt a brief flicker of doubt. But he pushed it aside, his jaw setting with renewed determination. Casualties were expected, part of any battle. His confidence returned full force as they closed the distance to the enemy lines. Soon they would be upon them, and then nothing could stop the Mongol war machine. Soon, very soon. The enemy line grew larger with each thundering stride. Altan could see their faces now, pale with fear despite their defensive positions. The natural obstacles ahead meant nothing to the Mongol charge. They would crash through whatever barriers stood between them and victory. His warriors raised their weapons high, ready to deliver the killing blow that would end this battle forever. The heavy cavalry struck first, their lances lowered like spears of destiny. These were Alten's finest warriors, his personal guard, armored heavier than the rest. They would break the enemy line, create the gap for the main force to pour through. Victory was so close now, practically within reach. One charge, one mighty effort, and the battle would be won. Steel met steel with deafening crashes as the heavy cavalry struck home. Lances shattered against shields, horses reared and screamed, warriors cried out in triumph and pain. The enemy line held for a moment, then began to buckle under the tremendous impact. Alten's heart soared as he saw victory within his grasp. Break the line, just break the line. Alten's warhorse leaped over fallen enemies, its powerful legs carrying them forward with incredible grace. The commander's sword flashed in the morning light, finding targets among the scattered defenders. Victory was his, he could feel it. The enemy line was breaking, their resistance crumbling. One more push, one final effort, and they would be victorious. The battle had become a melee of steel and blood, warriors locked in desperate combat across the field. Alten's charge had broken through in places, but the enemy fought with unexpected ferocity. Still, numbers would tell. His warriors outnumbered them, surrounded them. Victory was merely a matter of time now, merely persistence and strength. Mongol warriors pressed their advantage, sword against sword, shield against shield. The enemy defenders fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Alten watched from his vantage point, seeing his plan unfold perfectly. The center had broken, the flanks were crumbling. Victory was assured, inevitable, absolute. The enemy began to break, throwing down their weapons and fleeing for their lives. Mongol warriors cheered and gave chase, their victory complete and total. Alten allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched his enemies run. This was what the Mongols did best, break their opponents completely. The battle was won, the campaign successful. Alten raised his sword high, drinking in the cheers of his victorious warriors. This was the moment he had dreamed of, the perfect battle, the complete victory. His tactics had been flawless, his leadership inspired. The enemy was broken, their army destroyed. He had earned his place among the great Mongol commanders, his name would be remembered forever. Tears of joy streamed down Alten's face as he let out a mighty roar of triumph. Victory was his, complete and total. The enemy army was destroyed, their survivors scattered to the winds. He had done it, proven himself worthy of command. His warriors celebrated around him, their cheers echoing across the blood-soaked field. This was glory, pure and absolute. The battlefield fell quiet except for the cheers of celebration and the groans of the wounded. Mongol warriors examined their prizes, counted their dead, and tended to their injured. Alten surveyed the field with satisfaction, seeing the evidence of his complete victory everywhere. The enemy had been crushed, utterly and completely. His name would be sung in the courts of Khans for generations to come. But victory turned to horror as Mongol scouts discovered what they had missed. Hidden in the valley behind them waited fresh enemy reserves, hundreds of warriors ready for battle. Alten's heart sank as he realized his terrible mistake. In his eagerness for quick victory, he had failed to scout properly. The enemy had used their defensive position to hide their true strength, their real army waiting in ambush. Alten's triumph crumbled as the full horror of his mistake struck him. The celebrating warriors around him continued their rejoicing, unaware of the doom approaching from behind. He had been so focused on the visible enemy that he had ignored the possibility of reserves. Now his exhausted, scattered army faced fresh, rested warriors with numerical superiority. It was a trap, and he had walked right into it. The enemy reserves emerged from the valley like a dark tide, their banners snapping in the wind, their weapons gleaming with deadly promise. Hundreds of fresh warriors marched forward in perfect discipline, while Alten's army celebrated their supposed victory. The trap was closing, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His warriors were scattered, exhausted, their weapons still dripping with enemy blood. The celebrating stopped as Mongol warriors turned to face their doom. Shock and fear replaced triumph as they saw the fresh enemy army approaching. Warriors who had been laughing and boasting moments before now stared in horror at their situation. They were trapped between two forces, exhausted from battle, their weapons heavy with use. Altan's mistake had turned certain victory into certain defeat. Altan shouted desperately, trying to rally his scattered forces. Form up, he cried, but his warriors moved slowly, still stunned by the sudden reversal. How could this be happening? They had won, they had crushed the enemy completely. Yet here were more enemies, fresh and eager for battle. His mistake had cost them everything, turned victory into catastrophe. The enemy reserves charged forward with fresh war cries, their weapons gleaming in the morning light. Rested and eager, they struck like a hammer against Altan's anvil. His warriors, exhausted from their previous battle, could barely lift their weapons. The trap had been sprung perfectly, the enemy commander having played them like skilled musicians. Altan watched in horror as his army faced annihilation. Mongol warriors fell like wheat before the scythe, overwhelmed by fresh enemy soldiers who fought with rested strength and superior numbers. Those who had celebrated victory moments before now fought for their lives, their weapons feeling heavy and clumsy in their exhausted hands. Altan's heart broke as he watched his finest warriors cut down like cattle. His mistake had doomed them all. Altan's warhorse reared in panic as enemy warriors closed in from all sides. The commander who had led his army to supposed victory now faced the consequences of his arrogance. His mount screamed and fought, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to escape. The trap had closed completely, and he was at its center. His mistake had destroyed everything, everyone. The Mongol army was destroyed completely, crushed between two enemy forces like wheat in a mill. Warriors who had celebrated victory moments before now lay scattered across the field, their blood soaking into the earth they had thought to conquer. The few survivors fled in terror, pursued by fresh enemy soldiers who showed no mercy. Altan's perfect victory had become the perfect defeat. Altan's world ended in that moment of complete understanding. His army was gone, destroyed by his own arrogance and poor scouting. 10,000 warriors, his brothers, his friends, all dead because he had been too eager for quick victory. The shame burned in his heart like fire, hotter than any wound. He had turned certain victory into complete annihilation through one simple, fatal mistake. Altan fought with the fury of a cornered animal, his sword flashing against multiple enemies. He would not go down easily, would not let his mistake define his end. Each swing of his blade took an enemy warrior, but more came to replace them. His warhorse screamed and fought, but they were surrounded completely. Still he fought, still he hoped for some miracle, some way to undo what he had done. The spear found its mark, driving deep into Altan's side with cruel precision. Pain exploded through his body as warm blood began to flow. His sword fell from nerveless fingers as he grasped the shaft, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. The world began to spin around him, his vision blurring as life poured out onto the battlefield he had led his army to die upon. Altan fell from his saddle like a broken puppet, his armor clanking against the blood-soaked earth. His faithful warhorse stood over him, neighing in distress and pawing the ground protectively. The commander who had led 10,000 warriors to their doom now lay helpless on the field he had turned into a graveyard. His mistake had cost him everything, his army, his honor, his life. As life ebbed from his body, Altan's final thoughts turned to his terrible mistake. He had been so eager for quick victory, so confident in his own abilities, that he had failed to properly scout the battlefield. The enemy reserves had been hidden perfectly, waiting for the moment when his army would be scattered and exhausted. His arrogance had destroyed everything, turned certain victory into complete disaster. Altan's warhorse stood like a statue over its fallen master, its eyes showing intelligence and fierce loyalty. The animal had served him faithfully through countless battles, carried him to victory and now to defeat. Enemy warriors approached cautiously, respecting the animal's protective stance. Even in death, the bond between horse and rider remained unbroken, a testament to their shared journey through war and conquest. The enemy warriors finally overcame the protective warhorse, restraining the magnificent animal while tending to Alton's wounds. The commander who had led his army to supposed victory now lay at their mercy, his life hanging by a thread. He felt their hands upon him, heard their voices speaking words he could barely understand. His mistake had led him here, to capture and shame, to the end of everything he had held dear. The enemy celebrated their unexpected victory while Mongol survivors were taken prisoner across the blood-soaked field. What had begun as certain triumph had ended in complete catastrophe, all because of one commander's fatal mistake. The enemy had used their defensive position perfectly, hiding their true strength until the Mongol army was scattered and exhausted. Now they reaped the rewards of Alton's arrogance. Alton was carried away on a makeshift litter, his shame complete and total. The commander who had dreamed of glory now faced capture and dishonor, his army destroyed because of his single fatal mistake. He could hear the enemy soldiers speaking around him, their voices filled with triumph and satisfaction. His name would be remembered, but not as a hero. He had become a cautionary tale, a warning to all commanders about the price of arrogance. Alton's warhorse was led away, looking back toward its master with eyes that seemed to hold human intelligence and grief. The animal that had carried him through countless victories now faced separation from the only rider it had ever known. The proud warhorse snorted and pawed the ground, sensing that something irrevocable had changed. Even the animals paid the price for their master's mistake. Enemy commanders examined the captured Mongol equipment with professional interest, marveling at the quality of their opponent's gear. These were not the weapons of defeated peasants, but the equipment of seasoned warriors who had conquered half the known world. Yet here they lay, captured and useless, because their commander had made one terrible mistake. The enemy commanders would study this victory carefully, learning from Alton's error. Mongol warriors were led away in chains, their faces showing the shame of defeat and capture. These were men who had expected to return home as heroes, their names sung in the great halls of their people. Instead they faced slavery and dishonor, all because their commander had been too eager for quick victory. They would remember this day, remember how one mistake had destroyed 10,000 lives. The battlefield grew quiet as enemy soldiers began their work of cleanup and organization. The dead were removed, the wounded tended to, while Mongol prisoners were kept under careful guard. What had been a scene of Mongol triumph just hours before had become a graveyard and prison. The enemy had turned the tables perfectly, using Alton's arrogance against him and his army. As Alton recovered from his wounds and enemy captivity, he had time to reflect on his terrible mistake. The arrogance that had driven him to ignore proper scouting had destroyed his entire army. 10,000 warriors, his brothers, his friends, all dead because he had been too eager for quick victory. The shame burned in his heart like fire, a constant reminder of the price of pride. Alton sat in his crude prison cell, the weight of his mistake pressing down upon him like a physical burden. From commander of 10,000 to prisoner in a dark cell, his fall from grace had been swift and complete. The enemy soldiers who guarded his door would never know the full extent of his shame, the complete destruction he had brought upon his people. His name would be remembered, but as a warning rather than a hero. Alton wrote his confession by candlelight, analyzing every moment of the battle that had led to disaster. His handwriting revealed his emotional state, each word heavy with regret and understanding. He documented his mistake in detail, hoping that future commanders might learn from his error. The arrogance that had driven him to ignore proper scouting, the overconfidence that had led him into the enemy's trap, all of it recorded for posterity. His analysis was thorough and honest, documenting every tactical error that had led to disaster. He wrote of his failure to properly scout the battlefield, his overconfidence in the face of apparent enemy weakness, his eagerness for quick victory that had blinded him to hidden dangers. The document would serve as his legacy, not as a record of triumph but as a warning to future commanders about the price of arrogance. The enemy commanders read Alton's analysis with growing respect, recognizing the tactical brilliance that had been overshadowed by his fatal mistake. His honest assessment of his errors showed the mind of a true commander, capable of learning even from complete defeat. They would study his words carefully, using his experience to improve their own military planning. Even in defeat, Alten's tactical understanding had value. Alten was led away to face his final judgment, chains clanking with each step. The enemy commanders had decided his fate, and he accepted it with the resignation of a man who understood the full weight of his mistake. 10,000 lives had been lost because of his arrogance, 10,000 families left without their sons and brothers. He would pay for his error with his life, but the shame would last forever. In his final moments, Alten found peace in understanding the full consequences of his mistake. He had turned certain victory into complete disaster through one simple error of judgment. 10,000 warriors had died because he had been too eager for quick triumph, too confident in his own abilities. His shame would live on in the lessons learned from his defeat, a warning to all commanders about the price of arrogance and the importance of proper reconnaissance. Years later, nature began to reclaim the battlefield where Alten's mistake had turned victory into disaster. Grass grew around scattered weapons and bleached bones, while evening approached with gentle peace. The Mongol army that had charged so confidently to their doom was now dust and memory, their commander's lesson preserved in the tactical manuals of both victors and vanquished. One mistake had changed everything, teaching generations of commanders about the price of arrogance and the importance of patience in warfare.